May, can you please come in for a minute? Jason said, not even looking up from his tablet. It always starts with something small, an invitation to the office without explanation. An uncomfortable smile from the assistant who used to be chirpy and today suddenly became very busy. And silence. The silence that crunches in your ears louder than any official protocol. I walked in silently. It's not the first time in my life that I've walked into a room where everyone has already decided what to say to me. "Please sit down," he said. His tone was soft. His eyes were cold. Typical new generation style. We are all a team until it comes to something important. And then you find out that the team is those who stayed after you were thrown overboard. We are revising the company's structure. We want to be more agile and adaptive to the market. And, well, your position no longer fits into this strategy. I didn't blink. I didn't bite my lip. I just listened. The way you listen to a surgeon who says you need to remove something vital, but you already know you can live without it. That is, you are dismissing me. This is not a dismissal in the classical sense, he began, but I raised an eyebrow. What is it in the classical sense? Do you have a new terminology for devaluation? He fell silent. Finally, he looked up. He saw that he would not get a scene or tears from me. Only a pause. Silence. And this silence is the worst thing that can happen to a person who expects you to explode and confirm his decision. I got up. You don't need to thank me. You have already said everything. And I walked out. It's funny. It was a beautiful spring weather outside. May, green, new leaves on the trees. People downstairs were drinking coffee, talking about something carefree. And I, a woman who had spent 17 years of her life inside these walls, was walking down the corridor as if I were taking out the trash. My name is May Johnson. I am 58 years old, and I have just been told that my age, experience, and critical thinking are not part of the new business model. The irony is that the formula that made their main product a bestseller is mine. Literally. Not a metaphor, not I contributed. I wrote it myself, even before I was officially hired. Back then, it was a freelance development, and it's still licensed. But Jason didn't check it, and I didn't remind him. Because sometimes the best revenge is to say nothing. Just wait for the moment when everything collapses on its own. It's funny, isn't it? They think I've lost my job, and I'm just closing the last page of a chapter that should have been over a long time ago. That same day, I called one person, a person who always knows what to do in such cases. And as soon as I heard in the phone, "May, hi, I can guess what happened," I knew it was far from over. They like to call me the old guard. Out loud, with respect, in a half-toned voice, with a hint of regret. You know what they say? "May, you are our history." It always sounded as if the future was already without me. Just a memory. A nice picture from the company's archive. But I didn't start with the archive. I started in the kitchen. Yes, a banal home kitchen in Raleigh, North Carolina. There, between the pancake pan and the dried rosemary on the shelf, I first made the basic version of what is now called EcoFoam Pro. Back then, it was simply Liquid May, named as a joke by my husband, whom I still loved at the time, and who did not yet run away from life at the first smell of fatigue. I worked as an independent formula developer, a consultant for several brands that didn't want to pay laboratories, but wanted to have something of their own. This product never became their own, because it was mine. My own recipe, based on plant enzymes and surfactants that did not harm groundwater. I didn't even know at the time that I had hit the trend 10 years in advance. After a few tests with friends, including one very dramatic story where my product saved Cindy Park's favorite blouse after a wine festival, I realized it worked. That's when I first heard about Virexa. They were looking for something green-oriented, but commercial. Their previous product had received a lot of criticism because of the toxicity of the ingredients, and they needed a savior. And I became that savior. I signed the contract as a consultant. I retained the rights to the basic formula itself. It was clearly stated in Clause 2.4. They were licensed to use and modify it, but not to own it. At the time, it seemed like a trifle to me. But now it's like a bulletproof vest under a business jacket. 6 months later, I was officially invited to join the company. The offer was generous, and I accepted, not for the money, but for the feeling that I finally belong somewhere. I built everything from scratch. A pilot launch, micro-testing, cooperation with factories in Kansas, adaptation to European standards. I breathed it. And when the product finally hit the market and sold better in Walmart in the first month than any other detergent in the last 3 years, no one said thank you. Everyone just started saying that we have a great team. Team, that's great. But I was still writing the formula, at night, with the refrigerator humming, in a bathrobe, with a coffee stain. Then there was a wave of investors, meetings at conferences, new faces in the boardroom. Everything was getting shinier, more expensive, faster. And I didn't change. I remained the woman who knew how alkali works and how molecules behave when the temperature changes. I was still respected, but I was less often invited to strategic meetings. I saw young faces growing up, applauded for presentations that used slides from my reports. And I was silent. Not because I was weak, but because sometimes silence is a form of preparation. Do you know what it feels like when you see others building a tower out of the blocks you brought in your suitcase? But they are already convinced that these blocks have always been there? This is not an insult. It's just curiosity. When will it collapse? The first time I noticed that something had changed was the tone. Not the words. It was the tone. Young managers started responding to me in emails, not with, "Yes, May, thank you for the clarification," but with, "We've already decided that way, but thank you anyway." As if I were not part of the decision, but a friendly sign at the entrance. Then the invitations to the morning management meetings disappeared. They just stopped coming. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Until I walked in one day by chance and saw the words R&D team led by Connor Wexley on a slide. Connor, 7 months in the company, my subordinate. The guy who once brought slides to a presentation in Comic Sans and didn't understand why it was a problem. He was applauded. I was just standing by the door at the time. No one noticed me. It was the first time I felt like a phantom. Then the restructuring began. This word in corporate parlance means, we don't know what we're doing, but we want it to look cool. Or, we know what we're doing, but we don't want you to understand what it is. Jason, the new CEO, was charming. He was the type of person who gets invited to TED Talks, even though their slides mean nothing. He always smiled in the same way, as if he felt a little bit superior to the rest of the world, but he didn't want to offend you. It's just a fact. "We need an injection of fresh blood," he once said at a meeting. "The company has grown through experience. Now it's time to grow through speed." The room was bursting with enthusiasm. I was bursting with inner silence, because experience is not weight, it is an anchor, and they decided to cut the ropes. That same month, they fired Glenda, the best quality technician I'd ever known, who was 61. Jessie was hired to replace her, 26 years old. Her LinkedIn bio began with the words ambitious storyteller. Not a technologist, not a chemist, but a storyteller. Funny, if not so painful. When I tried to explain why it was impossible to change the dosage of one of the ingredients without recalculating the stability, I was told, "You are thinking very fundamentally. We want to move faster." "May, you're getting too technical," Connor said. "This is a time for results, not details." I looked at him. I just nodded. That evening, I opened the safe at home. I took out the same old hard drive, the one that held the first version of the formula. It was labeled, marked. Everything, down to the second of creation. And the realization that I was holding not just data, but control. Not because I want to take revenge, but because they are already taking revenge on me, for reminding them of the depths when they only want to skim the surface. When you are not invited, it's one thing. But when someone deliberately erases your presence, it's something else. This is politics. One morning, I logged into the internal document system, looking for an old presentation for an audit. I came across a file labeled Product Legacy Review. I opened it and froze. A document marked Used for External Communication, that is, for investors. Inside was the story of the creation of EcoFoam Pro. Not a word about me, not a single line, not a single mention. The author of the development is R&D lab team led by C. Wexley. I didn't even feel angry. Honestly, it was like a bad echo. You speak and you get nothing in return, as if you had never been there. But the most interesting thing was waiting at the end of the document. A section with the title, Transition from Proprietary Base to Optimized V2 Formula. And then, in the language of dry marketing, we have updated the formula to move from the old version to a more stable and scalable composition. The development was carried out by an internal team. The old version. I sat at my computer and kept silent, watching my product being called irrelevant, the one they were moving on from. I wondered, if it's so old, why can't they replace any of the key components without my coding? And most importantly, why am I finding this by accident? The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer I had worked with 10 years ago. Her name was Brenda. She specialized in intellectual property. She was straight as a ruler, smart as most people only dream of appearing. Is our formula agreement still alive? I asked, handing her copies of the documents. She flipped through a few pages and stopped. May, it's not just alive, she's armored. You keep the property. Their use is limited in time. And most importantly, any modifications created on the basis of your original remain legally derivative. You can call them for an audit. I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. And it was that night, at home, that I decided to go through my corporate email archive for the first time. Because one thing was running through my mind. If they were planning to change the formula, they definitely consulted, and they definitely left a trace. At 3 a.m, I came across an email sent by accident to a joint group with the lawyers, and to which I was obviously not supposed to be included. The subject line, EcoFoam Formula, what you can and can't get around. And then I saw something that made even me, a person with experience in battles, a little numb. Our goal is to create something similar, but legally non-identical. If we can change 15 to 20% of the structure, we may be able to position the new formula as an independent one. We need to avoid mentioning MJ in any communication. Jason W. Not May. It's MJ, not redesign, but bypass. Not collaborate, but exclude from communication. I was sitting in the darkness of the kitchen, with the same cup that still remembers the first sample of the product, and I thought, did they really think I was blind? The first week after the launch was like a puppet show. Smiles, press releases, enthusiastic LinkedIn posts from new interns who had seen the product but never held it in their hands. We have launched a revolution in eco-friendly home care, a new stage, new composition, a new era. These words looked like an advertisement for an anti-wrinkle cream. Lots of promises, zero substance. I didn't comment. Even in my head, I tried not to mock. I just watched. Do you remember how movies show explosion scenes in slow motion? That's how it was. The second week, I received the first calls from retailers I knew. One wrote, May, you're no longer with us, but customers are returning the batch because of the pungent odor. Are you sure this is your formula? Another, the film after washing. People are asking what happened. We don't know what to say. And most importantly, Kate wrote to me. She has been working in customer service since my first year at the company. Her voice was always on the edge between caring and tired, but this time she sounded worried. May, you haven't said anything official, I know. But tell me honestly, did you come up with this new lineup? I took a sip of tea, and for the first time in a long time, I answered the way I wanted to. No, Kate, it's not mine anymore. There was silence. Then relief. I knew it. I'm sorry. It's just that people are calling. One children's center reported a rash in kids after washing toys. We have no connection to R&D. Jason wants us to say that everything is within normal limits. Within normal limits, I repeated in my mind. Like in a hospital, when a patient is not getting better, but not dead yet. A subcoma formula. And then I saw a scene that I still replay with barely restrained laughter. I walked into a small organic store where a saleswoman in her 40s asked me as if I were a regular customer, Have you seen this new version of EcoFoam? It's not the same, is it? I think the old one was more natural. Maybe, I replied, the old one really knew what it was doing. She laughed. And I did too, inside. It's interesting how quickly a reputation is lost. Not loudly, but drop by drop, like a leak from a plastic canister. No one hears until there's a puddle. And the funny thing is, I was still silent. My legal agreement allowed them to use the original formula as long as they didn't change more than 30% of the composition. So, technically, the new product is no longer under the protection of the contract. So it was no longer my problem, but not their triumph either. They have fallen into the trap they dug for me. And me? I wrote it all down in my diary, wrapped a towel around my hair, made a green smoothie, and sat down to read the contract again. On page 9 was a clause that I had added at Brenda's suggestion. In the event of a public failure of a derivative version of the formula, the company undertakes to notify users of the return to the original composition. They thought it was just a checkbox. For me, it was a line of defense. In our first conversation, Laura said, "I knew you would come up with something. I was just waiting for you to say it." She was one of those people who never took center stage, but without whom something always broke down. The quiet front end that saved us from post-release disasters. After the layoffs, she applied for several positions, even traveled to Seattle for an interview. But her heart was still with us. That is, with me. We met at my house. Wine, cheese, a green folder. "It can still work," I said. "Just not there." Mailing, analytics, R&D, all departments that no longer existed in the company because they were absorbed by the innovation verticals. But the people remained. They wrote to me, not as a boss, as a person with whom it made sense. I started to make a list. Who else has passion? Who else remembers what a product is not for the sake of indicators? At the same time, I turned to Brenda, the lawyer who had handled my initial contract. She was working for herself. She had 2 kids, 6 coffee shops, and a habit of ending sentences with, "and that's not all." "You need structure," she said. "If you want to move, you have to move not as a person, but as an entity." "A company?" "Not yet. But a legal entity, yes. Register yourself. As a copyright holder. Make a separate protection for the entire line, from the name to the label. This is how the project called Clean Start was born. The name was temporary, but the essence is permanent. I created the concept of a new line based on my original formula, but with improved components, those that were too expensive at the time, but now they are affordable. Laura put together the design options. Owen, a former product designer, drew the bottle layouts on napkins from the bar where his girlfriend worked. We didn't dream of a startup revolution. We just wanted to bring back meaning. At one of the meetings we held in the kitchen of our apartment overlooking the parking lot, someone made a joke. "Is this the headquarters of a new brand?" I replied, "No, this is the headquarters of memory, because each of us had a memory, about how it all started, about how people worked not for the sake of KPIs, but for the sake of an idea. And this memory became a weapon, not against anyone, but for something. I set up a separate line of communication, not officially, but anyone who had contact with the affected clients of the old company could send them a letter with the wording, 'We know you are disappointed, and we hear you. You will soon find out where the real formula has gone.' While the old company was throwing money at crisis SMM campaigns and buying negative reviews on Google, we were compiling the first draft of technical documentation. I was not naive. I knew that the war would start as soon as they heard the name Clean Start. But I was no longer afraid, because I was no longer alone. I was in the kitchen when the phone rang. A classic of the genre, right? The water was still boiling. Ground cardamom was waiting in the cup. The screen flashed, unknown number. And I don't know what surprised me more, the call itself, or the fact that I immediately realized who it was. "May, hi, it's Jason." Pause. "Do you have a minute?" I remained silent just long enough for him to feel that he no longer had the right to ask me direct questions. "Yes," I answered briefly, sitting down in front of the window. The coffee never brewed, but the conversation was. "May, I'm not going to beat around the bush. We have a situation." Situation is a word that men in suits use when they talk about failure. The Environmental Inspectorate conducted an audit. It turned out that the new formula does not pass certification. In several batches, the level of ethoxylates was exceeded. We have temporarily stopped distribution. There is a risk of a recall. I took a pause, a psychological one, not because I hesitated, but because he had to feel the silence. It was part of my answer. We need your help. I know we didn't do everything right, but you could come back. As a consultant, temporarily, to... He didn't finish. Maybe because at that moment a lawyer entered the room. Maybe because the figure of a potential fine was already looming in his head. I closed my eyes, and I saw myself in the same kitchen a year ago, where I was manually weighing test tubes, where every drop had meaning. And now, the company wanted me to save what they had destroyed. Jason, I said slowly, you're not asking me to go back to the team. You're asking me to go back to chaos, and that's not the same thing. May, please, he said quietly. This isn't about us. This is about the market. We're going to lose partners. The shareholders are already calling. I can't keep control. You know what the worst thing about control is? I asked. It's always an illusion, and those who feel they are losing it have never had it. He fell silent, and I realized he didn't call because he believed in me. He called because he was scared, and fear is a bad motivator. If there is an official offer, I will consider it, I added, but on my terms. No hint of temporarily, no detours. I'll send everything to you by email. Thank you for listening. Don't thank me. We haven't even started yet. That evening I gathered the team. It's still the same room, my kitchen, but the air was different. It already had the smell of a real beginning. They are bending, Laura said. You mean, he called? I nodded. Then we need to hurry, because if they lose the market first, they'll start digging. Deep. I pushed aside the folder with the drafts of the new brand. We're not in a hurry, I said. We're calibrating, because I was no longer playing the game of reactions. Now it was my game. It was the annual industry conference Cleanform Expo. It was a gathering of startups, chemists, sustainable beauty brands, environmental investors, and, of course, the media, who love public scandals with a greenwashing flavor. This year's theme sounded almost comical. Pure formulas, pure values, pure leadership. The company that fired me was on the list of main sponsors. They were supposed to speak about an innovative approach to reformulating classic recipes. It's ironic, isn't it? I found out about this conference while I was still making coffee in my kitchen, with my laptop holding 2 books and 1 hope. And something clicked in me. It had to be more than just a panel discussion. It had to be a point. The moment when I would stop being a background character in my own story. I applied to speak under a different brand. I was approved. No one connected my name with the same formula. And it was even better. I walked into the conference room without a badge, without PR, without a LinkedIn entourage. I had 1 sheet of paper and a certificate. The room was white, sterile, with cheap microphones and coffee that tasted like just boiled forgotten. In the front row sat people who once couldn't live without me on Slack, but now didn't recognize me, or pretended not to. And our next speaker? The moderator didn't even try to hide his indifference. I stood up, slowly, without slides, no screensavers, just my voice and a document. My name is May Johnson, 58. The brand you're about to hear about was created by me, as was the formula you may know from other packages. It's mine, legally, and frankly, morally, too. Something clicked in the room. Not the equipment. It was people. I didn't shout. I did not accuse. I just showed them certificates, tests, documents, dates, things that don't require emotions. And then, I put up the last slide. There was only 1 sentence on it. We are not a new company. We are the old truth without makeup. The room was silent, and then there was an explosion. But the loudest silence came from him. Jason, the CEO. He stood aside, a glass in his hand that had long since become useless. His gaze was the same as the one that looked at me on the first day of my release, only now, without arrogance, only fear. And then he came over. May, can we talk? His voice hung on the last hinge. You've already spoken. Now it's my turn to listen, I answered. And I went to my daughter, who was waiting for me near the stage. She was holding my jacket, and she hugged me the way winners hug winners who have not yet realized that they have already won. The meeting was scheduled at the law firm's office. No, come back to us. No, let's just talk. The context was different. I didn't come to ask. I came to decide. Jason was 6 minutes late. A trifle, but symptomatic. His face no longer looked fresh and visionary, as it does in corporate brochures. It looked more like a man who hadn't slept for 3 nights and was trying to look like he had everything under control. "May, first of all," he began, but I stopped him with a gesture. "Let's cut the rhetoric. We have 45 minutes. Start." His voice trembled slightly as he laid out the proposal. A consulting role, honorarium, access to the labs, and, of course, an NDA. "You'll get public credit for the work," he said, "and a flexible schedule. We'll call it a partnership." I looked at him carefully, not angrily, not triumphantly, just carefully. "Jason, you've just described a role that sounds like a luxury cage, with a golden lock, but still a cage." I opened my folder. I pulled out a sheet of paper. "Here are my terms. No bargaining. Public recognition of my authorship, not in a press release, but in the company's official statement to investors. A complete withdrawal of the batch based on the updated formula. A new department under my leadership with a strategic focus on sustainable development. Not a consultancy. Full autonomy. 15% royalties on sales of any product using my formula, past and future. No NDAs. On the contrary, I need permission to tell you how it happened. The truth is my best defense." Jason was silent. Perhaps he was counting his losses in his head. Perhaps he was cursing himself for firing someone who was still holding the company together by an invisible thread. "And lastly," I added, "I'm not coming back. I'm coming in from the other side. And this is no longer your office. This is a shared territory. If you are not satisfied with this, I am launching my own brand. I already have a platform, and a team, and the trust of the market." He signed everything in 12 minutes. No comments. He just signed. And for the first time, he looked down. I left the office without a triumphant walk. I just walked out of the office steadily, breathing with all my lungs. The street smelled of ozone and wet asphalt. I looked up. It wasn't about retribution. It was about balance. I stood at the window of my kitchen, the same one where it all started. Water for tea was slowly boiling on the stove. Outside the window, the evening sky was filled with peach and lavender colors. I held an old ceramic plate in my hands, the same one I used to serve the first test batches of the product. It was cracked, but I didn't throw it away. I never threw it away, because in every line of that crack there was a mistake, an attempt, a repeat, an improvement. I put the plate on the table and slowly sat down. No one was calling. No one was waiting for a report. There were no calendars with red marks. The silence no longer scared me. It belonged to me. Brenda sent a message. "They've issued an official acknowledgement. Point 1 is complete." I smiled. Not for show, not for revenge, just relieved. The next message was from the new team. "The first samples are ready. We are waiting for your final approval." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the kettle, which was already starting to whistle softly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything, because there was no more them. There was only us. There was me. I took a spoon and carefully scooped up some of the new product from the jar that had been handed to me from the lab. The taste was the same, but now, without the taste of compromise. The doorbell rang. It was Celine, a former analyst who was now heading up the new development department in our initiative. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. We just signed our first major partner. You need to see this." She pulled out a tablet, the contract, the terms and conditions, and most importantly, the logo, a new one, without my name, but with my handwriting, my formula, my idea. "They want to go international with a launch in Vienna," Celine said, "and they want you to be the face of the launch, not as a CEO, but as a symbol." I smiled, and this time, not only with relief, but also with ease. "I'll think about it, but let's start with tea. I have a wonderful bergamot tea." We sat in the kitchen, just like before, like we always do, but now, without plans for survival, only for development. I looked at that cracked plate again, and for the first time in my life I thought, perhaps these cracks are not to hide them, but to let light pass through them.